for your contribution so far. I did listen to all of it right from the beginning, and I'll try not to be repetitive. I just wanted, just the Leaving Cert this year, the Leaving Cert results, I know Pauline touched on it. Do we have a date for the results?
No.
When will we have a date?
Last year we had the date at the end of May.
No, but it's normally the 15th of, right, so it's normally the 15th of August. Can we look towards that date?
It's typically is the middle of August when the results would issue. But again, looking at the things that are different this year. So we've had later results over the last 2 years because things were different, and things are different again this year.
Yeah.
So we haven't given a date for results at this stage, and it's going to be challenging because one of the things we need to ensure is that the results of the main set of examinations in June and the deferred sitting of the examination, which will happen after that, those sets of results need to be available at the same time. We don't know at this point the number of students that will sit that second set of examinations, the deferred series. So that's an uncertainty as a result of that, and there's also an uncertainty arising from the work that we need to do to ensure that the results this year are on aggregate no lower than the outcomes in 2020.
You won't know that information by the end of May, will you?
We'll probably have a better, I mean, as we're moving through the weeks and months, the picture becomes clearer. Sometimes it gets more murky again, actually, when COVID is concerned. We're hoping that it will become clearer and we'll be able to give more certainty in relation to the date, but we can't at this point.
I think that would be really good, and I do want to acknowledge the challenges and the work that has been done, you know, in the last 2 years. It has been challenging for everybody, not least yourselves, but I think the sooner people know, the lack of certainty has been very difficult. On that, I want to ask you, have you done a measurement of the hours that have been missed, the hours of learning that have been missed over the last 2 years by either the teachers' absences or the student absences? Do we have a picture of how much has been lost out?
We certainly don't, but we could take it away and bring it back to colleagues in the Department of Education. It's information that they might have. Okay,
I just think it's important. I think it's important that you know yourselves as well, I suppose, in terms of determining exams to give everybody a fair chance. I know that students this year are under severe pressure. Can I ask you as well, what percentage of students who do their Leaving Cert go on to higher and further education as we are now?
It's in the order of 60%. 60%.
60%, right, okay. And for the other 40%, how many go directly into employment?
Not information that I have to hand,
right.
Deputy, but I'm sure it's something we can find out.
Okay, I think it would be useful as well. Just in terms of the other data collection, do we have like the time series data in terms of measuring the correlation between those who have grinds and extra tuition beyond what's provided within the public system? Do we have a correlation between exam results and educational attainment?
Well, we don't, and we don't have information about who attends grinds or attends grind schools. But actually, I suppose the concern you'd have is that you're looking then at maybe a form of league tables and looking at performance related to where students are attending schools. It's not information that we gather. It's not information that we have.
So do you know if it's available? I'll just tell you why. How are we supposed to address the inequalities that are here? I'm really concerned about the widening inequality gap between those who can afford the grinds and the extra tuition as opposed to those who are sitting the same exam but cannot afford any of that and maybe come from homes that aren't conducive to them participating fully in terms of doing their homework and everything else. So how are we measuring it in order to be able to address it?
I'm not sure. I'm going to ask a question. Do we need to measure it to know that? Like, I think it's quite clear that that level of inequality that you're talking about has an impact on an outcome, and I think that's why the department has, very successfully introduced a DESH scheme and has built further on it again. But I'm not sure if it would even be. I'm not sure of the need, but I'm also not sure if it would be possible to gather the data on every individual. And how reliable it will be to know, to the extent of what grinds or additional support that they have, because it comes in so many other forms other than just grinds. The additional supports that young people have in the home varies from household to household, and yes, the income coming into the house is a very strong
But for
factor.
sure I would, because really my concerns, I suppose, is about the commodification of education. And for sure, I think just in terms of the affordability, we need to measure it. And I think it's something that we do need to look at, something we'll take up with the department again as well. Because we need to be able to measure the gap as it's widening, or as the initiatives like the JESH that you're saying there, which absolutely 100% to believe in. You know, how are we measuring the effectiveness of that in relation to examinations and educational attainment if we don't know? You know, I just think this data would be extremely useful for us in decision making.
As you were saying it, I think there was a study, but it's going back a number of years in relation to that relationship. But it's a third level study that was commissioned. I mean, it's an interesting piece of research.
Yeah.
It's not research that SEC would engage in, to be quite honest, because I mean, it's looking at an issue that we really don't have any control over in terms of looking at that. It's also, in some respects, the levelling is happening through the assessment process. There are other things that happen in the lead up to the assessment process where students do have access to different supports, different various parental support in the home, access to grinds. Quality of teaching and learning could come into it as well. So, I mean, we're not able to measure, you know, the individual's quality of teaching and learning. Maybe there's a reason why they're looking for additional support. So I think there are broader issues. I think there is a piece of research going back a number of years on it. We can certainly check and come back to you.
It's not, an easy thing to measure, but I think that I just think it would be really useful for us to do that in terms of decision making around it. I suppose one of the other things is that people, and I know you want to, but I just have a number of questions, and maybe you could address the next one, is that people are concerned around the timelines. So we've done so much talking about Leaving Cert reform. So in terms of the 40% continuous assessment, whether that be externally moderated, which I think it'll have to be, or most of it anyway, when will we be at that point where we're 60-40? When do you expect we'll be at it?
So I might begin, Deputy. So in terms, I suppose, of the Minister and the timelines that she has asked the NCCA and the SEC to work to, she has asked us to be, I suppose, ready to work with a network of schools in September 2024, and she has identified an initial set of subjects that she wants us to focus on. So those schools obviously need 2 years. You know, to work through those specifications, and we need the data then, and I suppose the feedback from teachers and students and parents and school leaders. And so from the Minister's timelines, she's then, I suppose, seeing 2027 as the point at which we have all of that data, all of that feedback to enable us then to take that on board as we continue to work in the NCCA, as we continue to work on the different specifications as modules. And I suppose what I would say, Deputy, as maybe a more overarching point about timelines, I mean, I think, and we see this internationally as well, I think there's often a perception that that curriculum development and curriculum change and assessment change is very slow in Ireland. But yet when you compare the overall timelines that we work to, they're on a par with those internationally. And so when you look at something as complex and as central and critical as senior cycle is, it takes time to work through these different issues in detail, and in particular, given that we give so much attention, and rightly so, to the experience of schools on the ground. So that does take time. And as I say, the Minister's own announcement and the timeline she has asked us to work to, 2024 and 2027 are key dates that she has referenced.
You can see why people would be concerned. It's just because we're living in such a fast-moving external environment. We really don't know, any of us here, what education delivery is going to look like in, you know, internationally, but, you know, in 10, 15 years' time, and just in terms of opportunities and looking at wider society and all of that. It really does. I think it's just more than a perception that it's very slow. I don't know the information internationally to be able to do the comparisons there. But I suppose what I would say on that is we need to do everything possible. And if there's a certain number of subjects being looked at, what are, you know, those subjects, and then how, you know, we're really talking here, before we see the 60-40, we're probably talking in the 30s, 2030s rather than anything else. So we're talking about children who are going to be gone right. We're talking about another generation, really, aren't we?
Yeah,
And that, I think, is the frustrating thing for everybody. And what can be done to actually speed that up?
I mean, if I can respond to that, I mean, one of the, I suppose, the other requests that the Minister included in her response to the NCCA was that, I suppose, once we have that learning from our work with the network schools, that we would then put, I suppose, a plan of work or programme of work in place that would see subjects being reviewed and updated and ready for schools to work with on an annual basis. So I think that helps, Deputy, in terms of shortening that timeline. But the other thing I would say in terms of the overall timeline, I think it is really important, I suppose, certainly from our perspective, to highlight that we're not at all waiting until the 2030s for actually many of these changes to be implemented and to have a real impact on the experience of young people. We were speaking a little bit earlier about some of the immediate pieces of work that we are already starting to progress. So one of those is around supporting young people who are currently in the Level 1, Level 2 learning programmes in junior cycle. So that work is already beginning within NCCA, and that's a really important one. Barry and Evelyn and colleagues in the SEC touched on earlier about, I suppose, removing the ring fencing that currently exists around the programmes that we already have as part of senior cycle provision. And the Minister in her response indicated that she wants some of that in place for schools from this September. We have a TY programme being updated and will be available for September 2024 that Barry has spoken to. So there are lots of, I suppose, changes already afoot, and changes that will be experienced actually very quickly by young people in the system, including those who are already in junior cycle as part of senior cycle provision. So while I accept the overall timeline is into the 2030s, I think there are important changes afoot in the more immediate to short to medium term.
And I think people need to see that, so I welcome that. But I have a number of other questions that I want to ask as well.
I just add very briefly, Deputy, so the number of subjects at the Leaving Certificate at the moment that currently have additional components worth more than 40% is 8 of the existing subjects. And I suppose Arlene has made the point that it's not just waiting for the end
8 out of 40.
8 out of the 40.
Yeah.
So there are 27 of them that have additional components, and 8 of those 27, the additional components have a value of more than 40%.
Yeah. And I think if we keep measuring that as we go along, you know, that then we'll be able to see progress around those. But out of those 40 subjects, what is it, half of them are languages. How many of the others would you classify as being technical or vocational, can I ask you?
In terms, so you mean the likes
the 20,
of construction,
say the 20, yes, that's right.
The count of them and come back to you on it if that's okay.
Yeah, if you could, and just, I know Donna Colleary, my colleague, referred to earlier on about like construction studies and what's needed there and the workforce that we need there. How hard is it then to roll out a practical subject like construction studies?
Those are, I mean, there are two very practical subjects there already, construction studies and engineering, and they both have 2 additional components of assessment. So they have a written examination, they also have a project, and they have what we call a day practical skills test, which is a point-in-time examination. Within, if we look at recent examples within junior cycle, the 4 if you like, technical vocational subjects at junior cycle were reformed as part of junior cycle reform. And the most recent reforms of new subjects at Leaving Cert, they're not, I don't think they meet the definition that you mean of vocational or practical, or technical, but they both have a very heavy demand in relation to the non-examination assessment. So that's PE and computer science.
Yeah, and and I do want to wish all the students today who are doing their practical day in engineering the best of luck, including my own son, who's his 19th birthday today as well. What a way to spend your birthday!
I hope he has a happy day.
Do the practical subject.
Sorry, that the department did issue, when the Minister made her announcement, what do these changes mean for me? And it was a really good document. I have 3 girls, and I was looking at it through the lens of one's in first year, one's in 3rd class, one's in senior infants. So, you know, there is something there that kind of gives you a sense of the momentum and the changes over time, which was really, really helpful. And as a parent, I was looking at it as well as having my NCCA lens on things.
Okay. Now, I need to ask you, has any work been done in relation to aligning the assignment and even releasing the results with the A levels in the north? through our work on the increasing cross-border enrolment in further and higher education, we've repeatedly come across challenges in relation to the exams, the grades and the timing of results. These have been substantial barriers, and they've come across time and time again in increasing access to educational opportunities on an all-island basis. Is this something that you've looked at throughout your work, or how do you view the challenges in this area, in how we can tie things up a bit better there?
I'm not sure that I think we've dealt with the results data already.
But just in terms of north-south, and it is a real barrier there in terms of the timings of things being resolved. I mean, have you really examined that and how we can have an all-island approach to creating the opportunities across the island?
Certainly from our own perspective in terms of cross-border collaboration, we have a very good relationship with SIA, the Council for Curriculum Examinations and Assessment in Northern Ireland, and have regular engagements with the executive of SIA. I hope I've answered the question already in relation to the results date, and certainly it's something that we can look at going forward. I think this year is going to be another outlier.
Right, okay. So can you see into the future that there would be an alignment of the results being released across the island?
Up to COVID, there was more of a close relationship between the dates of the A-levels and the dates of the Leaving Certificate results.
Right, and that's something that you would look at again?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Finally,
I just need to ask you about the higher
maybe
higher level thinking.
You might achieve the when you have a United Ireland, maybe.
That'll be soon. That'll be
so
soon.
I'm not sure about that now, but anyway.
That'll be soon. I want to get through to the critical thinking, and I cannot see how we can encourage, and I've looked at the Oxford report, and that is cited in several areas around the assessment of higher order thinking. And they have recommended, I think, that you narrow the curriculum there. How we can have 7 subjects, how students can do those in any depth and allow time and space for critical thinking when we have so many subjects, when we're trying to assess so many subjects. How do we have more critical thinking and problem solving with so many subjects?
It was looked at in terms of the senior cycle reform, and the basis on which we provide education at senior cycle, and consideration was given to narrowing the range of subjects in order that there would be less breadth, more depth in terms of the treatment. But I think the consensus that was reached, and the colleagues from the NCCA will come in on this, consensus that was reached in the review process was that on balance, the breadth and the type of learning experience that students have is actually better to have that broad base rather than a narrowing of the base. I don't know whether colleagues want to come in on that or indeed.
Yeah. It absolutely was a point that featured in the review, and I think it's fair to say it's something that we and when I say we, I mean kind of as a society, I think that we really hold as being very important throughout our education system, because we see this emphasis on a broad and balanced educational experience right from early years through primary and on through post-primary to the end of senior cycle. But I think, Deputy, on your point about kind of the critical thinking and the creative thinking, I suppose I would reference 2 things. Going back to, I think it was 2008, when NCCA published the 5 key skills for senior cycle, all of the subject specifications that have either been reviewed and updated, and the new specifications that have been developed, and there are new subjects as part of senior cycle provision in more recent years, all of those build on the 5 key skills of senior cycle. So there is an emphasis on creative and critical thinking as part of that specification work in the last kind of 10, 14 years. And a little bit earlier, Evelyn was speaking about 8 guiding principles that emerged from the review of senior cycle as being really important now to guide our thinking and our work as we redevelop senior cycle. And as part of those 8 guiding principles, there is an emphasis on that critical, creative thinking. So that would be very much to the fore in all of our work in the NCCA on the curriculum specifications, whether that's to do with subjects or modules or units of work or whatever the curriculum components consist of.
Are you satisfied that the marking system reflects the critical thinking that's that's necessary.
Yeah, I think just building on the point, it's very much the specifications with the last 10 to 15 years are less content-based and much more open to allow for the critical thinking. So it's becoming customer practice in the classroom. It's like the use of group work and pair work. And I think politics and society in particular, if you have a look at the examination paper in relation to that and the marking scheme on that, you can see that the students are being provided the opportunity to critically think based on case studies that they'd have specialised in the classroom, similarly with PE. And again, even with the mid-2000s with history and geography as those new specs were coming in. So yes, I think the space is there. It's not that they're doing too many subjects, it's that the newer specifications, and particularly those in the last 10 years, are less content-driven and more to provide opportunities for learning in that critical thinking space, so the students attend and sit into their exams and demonstrate that level of engagement to critical thinking in the classroom, in their examination script, because the exams provide the opportunity, and the marking scheme then rewards that what the candidate has produced on the script on the day. So there has been a very positive move towards that. And I think that will be built on further and further by having the additional component at school level, because that helps the students. It's their engagement in other activities, like your son today. That's a 6-hour exam. It's a big exam he's doing today, the engineering. But the work he's done on that has complemented his work and his project. Yeah. He's probably made a project as well.
I'm ready to conclude, but now
and then he'll go in and do his written exam. So I think
you've been saying by you've been just